The air on Grelix 4 could kill a grown Threxian in under 3 minutes. That was the accepted truth across 7 sectors. The planet's atmosphere, a swirling soup of sulfurous compounds and hyper-reactive ammonia vapors, had long been catalogued by the Galactic Accord as biologically incompatible with all known oxygen-breathing lifeforms. The native fauna were gelatinous, translucent things that slid across the shimmering obsidian ground without need for lungs or bones. So when the supply shuttle from the Accord's research hub touched down and the ramp lowered, no one expected a human to walk out. Yet out came Yarik Penner, coughing once into the filter mask strapped over his nose and mouth, the rest of his suit coated in a slick, matte gray exo-layer. He moved slowly, deliberately, boots crunching on the jagged black crust. Inside the observation dome, Valkyrie tilted its elongated head, one amber eye narrowing. "That is a human," Valkyrie muttered to the technician beside him. The technician, a Kethari named Lum, adjusted his cranial sensors and squinted. "Impossible. The atmosphere would liquefy his inner lungs in under 6 minutes. He's been out there for 8. Yarik paused near a steaming fissure, pointed a small device at it, and muttered something to himself before tapping his wrist console. "Maybe it's a drone suit," Lum suggested. "Remote-controlled." Valkyrie turned and strode toward the decontamination chamber. "We'll see soon enough." Inside the dome, Yarik peeled off the outer layer of his helmet and pulled it free with a hiss. His face was flushed but smiling. "Yarik Penner, Earth Systems Biologist. Permission to breathe inside your bubble." Valkyrie blinked. "You are alive." "Yeah, bit sweaty, but definitely alive." Yarik held up a sample pod. "Got your sulfur lattice readings. Spore growth in the vent cracks is higher than you thought." Valkyrie gestured toward the central chamber. "You will explain how you are not dead." Yarik followed, unzipping his suit and letting it hang around his waist. His undershirt was dark with sweat. "Honestly, I didn't expect it to work this well. But the exogel is holding." "You mean that film you coated yourself with?" "Not a film," Yarik said. "It's a synthetic protein matrix. Binds to the outside of skin and armor to neutralize acidic compounds on contact. Took me 3 years to design." Lum hovered nearby, still staring. "Why would a human volunteer to walk onto Grelix 4? "Because you told us we couldn't," Yarik replied. "You gave up on this planet. But it's full of extremophile life, and extremophiles are where we find new medicines." Valkyrie crossed his arms, 3 of them. "Other species have tried. Even the Volunans failed, and they can breathe liquid methane." "Yeah, but they didn't bring a protein matrix that mimics the mucous membrane of a lava worm from Earth's Mariana Trench, did they?" Valkyrie exhaled slowly. "You were mad." Yarik grinned. "I get that a lot." Over the next few weeks, he made daily excursions onto the surface. The first few were short 10 minutes, then 15. By the 4th week, he was setting up temporary test labs in the open air, crouching over steaming fissures and planting sensors. The dome's crew watched from inside, always ready to trigger the emergency retrieval drones, though he never asked for one. One morning, Yarik staggered back through the airlock with a limp. "You were injured," Valkyrie said, glancing down. "Twisted my ankle," Yarik muttered, wincing as he peeled off his boot. "Slipped on a patch of that glassy fungus near the ridge. You will require bone imaging. Already ran a scan in the rover. No fractures, just a sprain." Valkyrie frowned. "You should rest." "I will. But I got the sample. The fungus has a layered silicate structure. It's absorbing ambient toxins faster than anything we've seen." "You risked your bones for a fungus." Yarik looked up. "You risked your reputation saying humans couldn't survive here. We're both out on limbs." The Kethari medic insisted on immobilizing his ankle with a biofoam cast, and Yarik grudgingly agreed to stay inside the dome for a few days. Even then, he spent his time analyzing the collected samples, charting growth patterns, and running simulated exposure tests. On the 6th week, the first storm hit. Grelix 4 storms were not rain or lightning but pulses of electrically charged gas that rolled across the plains in shimmering waves. The dome sensors caught the early signs, and the crew locked down all external ports. Yarik had just returned from a field run, his suit covered in a thin layer of mineral dust. He was 5 meters from the airlock when his boot caught on the edge of a vent plate and he tumbled forward, slamming his side against the rocky ground. The crew watched in horror as he didn't get up. "Get the drone," Lum barked. "No," Valkyrie said. "He's moving." Yarik dragged himself upright, one hand pressed to his ribs. He staggered forward, every step labored. The storm's edge had begun to shimmer on the horizon. Inside, the chamber was silent as he finally reached the hatch and collapsed inside. "Suit breach," he gasped, pointing to his side. "Left flank. Inner membrane might be compromised." The medic rushed in, scanning him and pulling the suit free. His shirt beneath was soaked in blood. The skin showed a deep laceration across his ribs and a cracked bone. "You will not return outside," Valkyrie said later, arms folded. "I have to. Storms like that only happen once every few cycles. The gases might have altered the surface chemistry. You were bleeding internally." "Not anymore. The clotting gel stabilized it." "You were coughing up blood." Yarik wiped his mouth. "It's just irritation. I'm resting tomorrow." He rested for 3 days, then limped back into the field with a new version of the gel matrix designed to resist storm residue. By the 8th week, the alien crew had stopped betting on how long he'd last. Now they watched his progress with a mix of disbelief and quiet admiration. He set up a semi-permanent research station near the ridge. He installed wind turbines for power, built a sealed habitat tent, and began cultivating the glassy fungus in control trays. When a second storm came, he was ready. The dome team watched as the storm rolled over his camp. For 7 hours, the sensors lost contact. Then Yarik's voice crackled over the comms. "Camp intact. Matrix held. And you're not gonna believe what the storm did to the fungus." He returned the next day with a tray of glowing blue samples. Valkyrie met him at the airlock. "We are sending this to the Accord's central labs. This could be medicinally significant." Yarik nodded. "I was hoping it might be. The mutated strain is producing a compound similar to a human antiviral protein. You survived 2 major storms, multiple injuries, and prolonged exposure. You were correct, humans can survive here." "Not just survive," Yarik said, sitting down with a sigh. "We adapt." He didn't say it with pride or superiority. He said it like a man who was tired, sore, and carrying the weight of something bigger than himself. Valkyrie looked at him for a long moment. Perhaps the problem was not the planet. Perhaps it was our assumptions. Yarik leaned back against the wall, closing his eyes. That's usually where the problems start. By the start of the 10th week, Yarik had lost the upper half of his left eyebrow. "Did you burn your face?" asked Valkyrie, his gaze fixed on the raw, pink skin above Yarik's eye. Yarik tapped the spot gently. "Nope. Acid spores. They bloom in the evening and pop like confetti if you step too close. One of them sprayed me while I was setting up Tray 49. You allowed something to detonate against your face? Not on purpose. I was crouched. It was enthusiastic." Valkyrie tilted his head. "You were bleeding slightly. Just surface damage. The gel barrier held. I sterilized and sealed it already." Yarik dropped his pack onto the lab table and opened it with one hand. "More specimens. The ridge fungus is reacting to the trace voltage from the last storm. I think it's growing toward the currents." Valkyrie did not move, eyeing him cautiously. "Your epidermal layers are becoming increasingly unstable. You are developing dark patches along your neck." "I know. I'm tracking them." Yarik pulled out a small scanner and held it to his throat. "It's pigmentation stress. My body's trying to adapt to the trace chemicals in the air. Not dangerous yet. You continue to expose yourself despite cumulative harm. It's all data. My tolerance is part of the experiment. Your body is not an instrument." "Sure it is. Just one with a very short warranty." Valkyrie didn't respond. He simply turned and walked away, leaving Yarik alone with the trays of softly glowing fungal matter and the quiet hum of the dome's equipment. 6 days later, Yarik collapsed halfway between the observation ridge and the camp perimeter. The sensors caught his fall and the retrieval drone launched without waiting for human authorization. By the time he regained consciousness, he was strapped to the medical slab inside the dome, his body drenched in sweat and his pupils dilated to the size of currency coins. "Don't lift your head," said the Kethri medic, tightening the strap across his chest. "You experienced systemic shock. Your blood pressure dropped to unsustainable levels." Yarik's voice came out a ragged croak. "Did I drop the tray?" "No," Valkyrie replied, standing behind the medic. "You set it down before you fell." "Oh, good. That one had the moss clusters. You lost consciousness for 16 minutes. Your internal temperature spiked to levels that would rupture Threxian tissue. I felt warm. You were near death." Yarik blinked slowly. "It wasn't the heat. I think the spores reacted to the storm residue. Might be producing neurotoxins. You inhaled them. I wasn't wearing the full seal. The suit was fogging up. I thought the filters would hold." The medic inserted a translucent needle into Yarik's arm. "You are delusional from toxin exposure. You will remain here for no less than 72 hours. I need to." "You will remain here," Valkyrie said again, more forcefully. Yarik didn't argue. He was asleep within minutes. On the second day of his enforced recovery, he woke up with a full-throated scream that sliced through the silence of the medical dome. The medic rushed in, followed by Valkyrie, both of them expecting a seizure or convulsion. Yarik sat bolt upright, eyes wide. "I figured it out. You are hallucinating." "No, listen. The moss clusters, they're not feeding on the minerals. They're feeding on the electrical discharge from the storm residue. That's why they're growing along the ridgelines. They're literal bioconductors. You are sweating profusely and your speech patterns are erratic. I need a voltmeter. And some of the ridge lichen. I left a batch in tray 27. If I can map the conductivity across the spore lines, we might be able to culture them for energy harvesting. You are not permitted to stand." Yarik swung his legs over the side of the slab. "Help me walk, or I crawl." Valkyrie didn't move. "You are the most stubborn living organism I've encountered." "Thanks," Yarik said, already reaching for the portable scanner. By the end of the hour, he had cobbled together a makeshift test rig from spare lab parts, a few fiber optic lines, and the tray of moss he retrieved against medical advice. Valkyrie stood back, watching with visible discomfort as Yarik bent over the equipment, his bandaged hand steadying the voltmeter. The moss pulsed faintly under the probe. "There," Yarik whispered. "It's transmitting." The ridge moss, it turned out, had developed a crude form of electrical signaling. Not intelligence, but reaction. When exposed to minute changes in atmospheric charge, it responded with bioluminescent flickers and voltage shifts measurable across its colony. Yarik demonstrated it by waving a charged rod near the tray, eliciting a synchronized glow that moved like a ripple across the sample. "This isn't just passive adaptation," Yarik said. "It's active environmental processing. The colony is adjusting itself in real time." Valkyrie leaned closer, his expression unreadable. "You believe this organism is responding to your presence?" "To the probe, yes. To me? Possibly. I've been collecting samples from multiple ridges. The ones closest to my camp have begun growing toward my equipment lines. You have altered their behavior. I think they're trying to communicate." Valkyrie straightened. "With you?" Yarik shrugged. "Or with electricity. But I'm the only idiot walking around with a pocket full of it." 3 days later, the Accord's lead xenobotanist arrived on Grelix 4, a towering robed figure from the Glavari species known for their cautious optimism and unshakable patience. They descended from the courier shuttle and spent 23 minutes examining Yarik without saying a word. Finally, they turned to Valkyrie. "Does it always leak fluids from its face?" "That indicates exertion," Valkyrie replied. "Curious. The The Glavari scientist, whose name contained no vowels and was thus unpronounceable without a resonant chamber, settled into the dome's analysis chamber and spent the next 2 days reviewing Yarik's data. They asked no questions. They made no comments. On the 3rd day, they summoned Yarik. "You are aware this discovery could alter planetary classification protocols?" Yarik nodded. "I was hoping for that, yeah? You should not have survived. I get that a lot. You exposed yourself to an uncontained biosystem without complete mapping. You altered its growth vector. You introduced foreign matter to its colony surface. You risked ecological contamination of both yourself and the native life forms. All true. And yet, the Glavari lifted a slender, silver instrument and tapped it against the edge of a moss tray. The colony flared in reply, a soft pulse of green and blue spreading across its surface. "It answers," the Glavari said almost reverently. Yarik smiled, his teeth still stained faintly from the nutrient paste he'd been living on. "I think it's curious." "You are not a scientist," the Glavari said. "I have 3 degrees." "You are not a scientist," they repeated. "You are something else." Yarik tilted his head. "Trouble? Possibly. But useful." Later that night, as the dome lights shifted into their low cycle and most of the crew retreated to their rest chambers, Yarik sat alone in the ridge lab, watching the moss flicker. He tapped the probe again, then rested his fingers gently against the edge of the tray. The moss glowed under his touch. "Yeah," he whispered. "You're watching too." He didn't notice Valkyrie standing in the shadows near the entrance. The Threxian said nothing, only observed for several minutes, then turned and walked away, leaving Yarik and the moss in silence. By the start of the 12th week, Yarik's body had begun to betray him in increasingly imaginative ways. The patchy skin along his neck had deepened to a bruised gray, and his right hand had developed a persistent tremor that made fine motor work nearly impossible. He sat hunched in the auxiliary lab dome, jaw clenched, as a Glavari technician scanned his abdomen with a palm-sized diagnostic disc. "You are experiencing organ instabilities," said the technician, its voice low and fluid. "Liver function has dropped by 37%. Your stomach lining shows signs of chemical erosion. This is not sustainable." Yarik flinched as the scanner buzzed over his ribs. "I've been saying that about my student loans for years. This is not whimsical. Neither is science." The technician withdrew the scanner and glided 2 steps back. "You will be evacuated within the next rotation. That is final. Not until the moss sequencing is finished. You will not survive another storm cycle." "I don't plan to." The technician paused, unsure if that was a joke or not. Yarik didn't elaborate. He pulled his shirt back on with difficulty, the fabric sticking to the raw patches of his side. They left him alone in the lab after that. Not as punishment, but in resignation. Outside, the storm had passed. The air shimmered faintly, the kind of distortion that signaled high charge retention in the soil. Yarik moved to the outer bay and stared through the reinforced glass at the ridgeline. Small glints of blue flickered where the moss colonies had expanded again, stretching across the rocks in slow, deliberate arcs. A few of the growths had climbed halfway up the edge of his camp's solar array. He pressed his forehead to the glass. It was cool. For the first time in 3 days, he felt something close to relief. At midday, Valkyrie entered without warning. "You are being extracted." "Not yet. You are dying." "I've been dying slower than expected for weeks. Let me finish what I started." "There is no honor in martyrdom." Yarik turned to face him. "I'm not trying to be a hero. I'm trying to finish a job no one else wanted." Valkyrie stepped forward, arms lowered. "You have already proven your point. The Accord will fund permanent research now. Other teams will be sent. Let them continue. They'll never be able to trace the changes if I don't map the colony behavior first. The moss is reacting to me. Not the equipment. Not the probes. Me." Valkyrie's eyes narrowed. "You believe it is aware of your presence?" "I think it's learning from it." Yarik moved to the table where a series of trays glowed with different intensities. "I've been testing interaction patterns. Physical proximity, electrical interference, even heat signature. The closer I am, the more synchronized the pulses. Yesterday, one of the colonies shifted color before I even touched the tray. A coincidence? I've repeated it 7 times. Valkyrie remained silent. I don't think it's intelligent, but it is reactive. And if it's reacting to me, then I'm part of the system now. Pulling me out before it's mapped would make the data useless. You will not survive long enough to complete the analysis. Then help me finish it faster. Valkyrie didn't respond right away. Then, quietly, what do you need? Electrostatic mapping grid. Full quadrant coverage. And I need the ridge samples moved into the primary biodome. They're too exposed out there. I will requisition the equipment. Yarik sat down, exhaling slowly. Thanks. It took 2 days to set up the new grid. The moss trays were relocated one by one, carefully transferred under sealed environments to avoid exposure shift. The dome's central floor was cleared and Yarik marked out zones with low wattage emitters, forming a crude matrix of electrical fields. Overhead, suspended sensors tracked every flicker of light and charge. By the third night, the moss was forming patterns. They weren't symmetrical. They weren't geometric. But they were repeating. The pulses clustered near Yarik's usual path through the dome, following the routes he took most often. When he hovered too long in one spot, the moss brightness increased. When he left for extended periods, it dimmed. Valkyrie stood with him that evening, watching the flickers. It is adapting. Yarik nodded. I don't know what it's trying to do, but it's trying. You are certain this is not random? Random doesn't form feedback loops. Valkyrie tapped a control pad, dimming the dome's lights. The moss pulses became more pronounced. You are still unwell. Don't need to be well to observe. Your hands are shaking. I noticed. You are not afraid? Yarik looked at the moss, then at his trembling fingers. I've worked in pressure domes under Arctic oceans. I've had boron gas leak into my suit seals. I've been trapped in a mudslide with 2 minutes of oxygen left. No, I'm not afraid. I'm tired. Then rest. Soon. The final mapping sequence took 5 more days. The moss patterns began to form arcs across the grid, overlapping with the low-field emitters Yarik had installed earlier. He adjusted the inputs and the moss adjusted with him. Not instantly, but consistently. It was the first time a non-sentient organism had demonstrated active field recognition without central nervous structure. He uploaded the data to the Accord's mainframe, flagged every variable, annotated every deviation, and attached a final note. Further exposure may trigger more advanced reaction. Consider careful proximity simulations using human analogs. He signed it, then shut the terminal. Valkyrie found him the next morning sitting beside the trays, forehead resting on the edge of the table, hands motionless. You are finished? I am. The shuttle arrives at rotation's end. I know. You will not return here. Yarik looked up, eyes bloodshot. I think it knows that. Valkyrie didn't ask what he meant. The extraction ship landed without ceremony. A Glavari medical team arrived with a full isolation pod, slid Yarik into it, and began stabilizing his vitals. He didn't resist. His skin was pale and dry, and he coughed once every few minutes, but he remained conscious. As they lifted him toward the ramp, he looked back at the dome. The moss trays glowed faintly through the window. One of them pulsed 3 times in rapid succession. Valkyrie watched from the ridge. Yarik raised a hand. Whether it was a wave or a signal didn't matter. The dome lights dimmed behind him. The moss continued to pulse. Not randomly, not aimlessly, but with a rhythm that mirrored the pattern Yarik had used when testing their reactivity. The team sealed the hatch. The ship lifted from the ground, cutting through the distorted air, and angled toward the stars. The research dome remained. The moss grew. And the data Yarik left behind changed how the Accord classified life across 111 cataloged worlds. No one ever walked Grelix 4 again without remembering the one who did.